Daniel Thompson was exhausted. After pulling 12-hour shifts at the construction site all week, Saturday was supposed to be his day of rest. He left early that morning to grab coffee from the corner cafe, hoping the caffeine would help him push through a long list of chores his wife Vanessa had already lined up. As he turned onto their street in Maplewood Estates, his mind was on the smell of fresh donuts in the passenger seat rather than on the fine print of neighborhood rules. The community was famous, or infamous, for its strict homeowners association. Every fence post, mailbox, and even the shade of exterior paint was regulated. Neighbors whispered about violations that had cost families hundreds of dollars. Some said the HOA officers practically camped outside homes, looking for the slightest misstep. But Daniel had lived here long enough without trouble, so he wasn't worried. When he pulled into their driveway, he noticed their usual spot was blocked by the landscaper's truck. With no room, he slid into the open space next to theirs. It looked harmless, just another concrete rectangle under the bright morning sky, no chain, no sign. He shut off the engine, grabbed the coffee tray, and hurried inside. Vanessa met him in the kitchen, arms crossed. She had that look, the one that meant trouble. "Where did you park?" she demanded. "Right next to us," Daniel replied casually. The spot was empty. Her eyes widened. "Daniel, that's the Jenkins assigned space. I told you 100 times, you can't park there." He rolled his eyes. "It's just for a few hours. They won't even notice." But Vanessa wasn't convinced. She paced to the window and pulled the curtain aside just as a black SUV rolled slowly into the cul-de-sac. Two HOA officers stepped out, both in crisp black uniforms with shiny badges clipped to their belts. Clipboards in hand, they walked with the deliberate pace of people who knew they were feared. Vanessa gasped. "Oh no, they're here. They saw your car." Daniel set the donuts down. "Relax, it's not a crime." He marched outside, trying to look confident. One officer, a tall woman with sharp features, examined his SUV and scribbled something down. The other, a heavy-set man with a trimmed beard, looked up at Daniel. "Sir, is this your vehicle?" "Yes, it is." "Is there a problem?" "This space is reserved. Parking in it is a violation of HOA policy. You'll be issued a formal warning." Daniel clenched his jaw. "It's one time. My driveway was blocked. Can't you let it slide?" The officer's pen didn't hesitate. She tore a slip from the clipboard and tucked it under his windshield wiper. In bold red letters, the paper read, "First warning, unauthorized parking." Behind him, Vanessa had come outside. She wasn't quiet about her feelings. "I told you not to do this, Daniel. You never listen. Now look, everyone will know we've been written up." Daniel turned, embarrassed as he noticed blinds twitching in the neighboring houses. Faces peeked out, whispering. The officers didn't miss a beat. They noted Vanessa's angry tone, Daniel's defensive stance, and the audience gathering silently behind curtains. "This warning will remain on record," the tall officer said flatly. "Further violations may result in fines or additional disciplinary actions." Daniel wanted to argue, but Vanessa's glare cut him down. He muttered, "Fine," and grabbed the slip from the windshield. The officers returned to their SUV, their job done. As the black vehicle pulled away, Vanessa crossed her arms tighter. "This is just the beginning. You've put us on their radar. Do you even understand what you've done?" Daniel didn't answer. The slip trembled in his hand, the bold letters burning into his mind. For the first time, he felt the weight of the HOA's power, and the humiliation of standing exposed in front of his own wife and neighbors. What seemed like a small mistake was about to spiral into something much bigger. By Sunday morning, word of Daniel's parking mistake had already traveled through Maplewood Estates like wildfire. Neighbors didn't need social media here. The HOA's grapevine was faster than any algorithm. By the time Daniel stepped out to grab the newspaper, Mrs. Henderson across the street gave him the kind of tight-lipped smile that said, "I know what you did." 2 houses down, the Wilson kids giggled and whispered when he passed. Even the Jenkins, whose spot he had stolen for a few hours, waved stiffly instead of greeting him as usual. Inside, Vanessa was at the dining table, her phone buzzing constantly. She was in 3 different neighborhood group chats, and all of them had one topic, Daniel's violation. She read the messages aloud like a prosecutor listing charges. Can you believe someone actually parked in the wrong spot? That's from Donna. And here's another. The Thompsons should know better. They've lived here long enough. Oh, and look at this one. Richard from the HOA himself. Rules exist for a reason. One slip leads to chaos. Daniel groaned, massaging his temples. It was one parking mistake, Vanessa, not a bank robbery. But she wasn't listening. She slammed her phone down. You've embarrassed me in front of the entire neighborhood. Do you know how humiliating it is to have people think we don't follow the rules? Her voice rose higher, sharp and cutting. Daniel tried to stay calm, but his patience was fraying. Embarrassed you? Vanessa, I live here too. I'm the one who got written up, not you. Their argument escalated, voices bouncing off the walls. Finally, Vanessa stormed outside, and to Daniel's horror, she didn't stop on the porch. She marched right to the driveway where several neighbors were tending their lawns and deliberately raised her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. My husband thinks rules don't matter, she shouted. He thinks the HOA is a joke. He just does whatever he wants, and now we're paying for it. Daniel's chest tightened. He rushed outside. Vanessa, stop making a scene. But she spun on him, eyes blazing. No, Daniel, they should know the truth. You're careless. You don't respect the community. You're dragging my name through the mud. By now, curtains were pulled back and more neighbors stepped outside, pretending to water plants or check mailboxes while watching the fight unfold. Daniel felt every pair of eyes on him, judging, whispering. As if on cue, the black HOA SUV rolled into the cul-de-sac again. The same two officers stepped out, clipboards ready. Their expressions were unreadable, but Daniel swore he saw amusement flicker across their faces. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, the tall officer began, we've received multiple reports of loud arguments disrupting the peace. Public disputes are not in keeping with community standards. Daniel's jaw dropped. Are you kidding me? We can't even argue in our own driveway. But Vanessa, instead of defending him, turned to the officers. I told him not to break the rules. Maybe if you fine him, he'll finally learn. The betrayal stung more than the warning slip had. Daniel stared at her, unable to believe she had just thrown him under the bus in front of the entire neighborhood. The officers jotted down notes while neighbors whispered louder. Finally, the shorter officer spoke. Consider this an informal notice. But continued behavior like this will result in formal fines. They returned to their SUV, leaving tension thick in the air. Daniel looked at Vanessa, but she refused to meet his eyes. Instead, she turned back toward the neighbors and announced, I'm sorry you all had to witness this. I'll make sure he doesn't cause any more trouble. The neighbors nodded sympathetically, some even clapping her on the shoulder as if she were the victim. Daniel stood frozen, the villain in his own driveway, shamed by the very person who was supposed to stand beside him. That night, lying in bed, Daniel couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the looks on his neighbors' faces. He heard the whispers. And worst of all, he replayed Vanessa's words. Maybe if you fine him, he'll finally learn. For the first time, he realized this wasn't just a battle with the HOA. It was a battle inside his own marriage, and he wasn't sure which opponent was worse. By Tuesday morning, Daniel thought things might finally settle down. The warning slip was still tucked inside the kitchen drawer, Vanessa had cooled down a little, and the neighborhood seemed quieter. Maybe, just maybe, people had moved on to gossiping about someone else. That illusion shattered when Daniel opened the mailbox. Among the bills and flyers was a stark white envelope stamped with the HOA's crest. He tore it open, hoping it was just a routine notice. Instead, his stomach dropped. Notice of violation, improper parking. Subject to fine, $250. Daniel's jaw clenched as he read the letter twice. This has to be a mistake, he muttered. It was my first violation. Vanessa, sipping her coffee in the kitchen, looked up. What now? They fined us. $250, for parking. She set the cup down slowly, eyes narrowing. Let me see. She scanned the paper, her lips tightening as she reached the fine print. Any violation may result in immediate fines if deemed disruptive to community harmony. Daniel smacked the paper on the counter. Disruptive to community harmony? Are they serious? Vanessa crossed her arms. Well, you did disrupt the peace with your little parking stunt. And then our argument in the driveway didn't help. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. Are you siding with them again? I'm siding with reality, Daniel. We live here. We agreed to their rules when we bought this house. You can't just ignore that. Before Daniel could reply, there was a knock at the door. Standing outside were the same two officers, but this time they weren't alone. With them was Richard, the HOA president. He was a tall, lean man in his late 50s, dressed in a tailored navy suit instead of casual weekend wear. His smile was polished, his tone calm, but his eyes carried the weight of authority. Mr. Thompson, Richard began, stepping inside as if invited. We need to have a conversation. Daniel clenched his fists but forced politeness. About what? I already got your letter. Richard's smile didn't falter. Yes, about that. The fine stands. But more importantly, this kind of behavior, parking violations, public disputes, sets a tone we cannot allow. This community thrives on order, on respect. One family's disregard threatens everyone's peace. Daniel's voice rose. It was one mistake. One parking spot for a few hours. This is insane. Richard glanced at Vanessa, then back at Daniel. It's never just about parking. It's about whether you belong here. If you can't respect the HOA, perhaps this neighborhood isn't the right fit for your family. The word stung. Perhaps this neighborhood isn't the right fit. Daniel heard the threat beneath the polished tone. It wasn't just a fine, it was exile. Vanessa, instead of defending him, shook her head. Maybe he does need to learn the hard way, Richard. Daniel's eyes widened. Vanessa, are you serious? She looked away, her silence answer enough. Richard handed Daniel another copy of the violation notice, then adjusted his cufflinks. You'll have 10 days to pay the fine. Failure to comply will result in additional penalties. He nodded politely, then left with the officers trailing behind him. Daniel stood frozen, the letter crumpled in his hand. His own wife had practically sided with the enemy. The neighbors, watching from across the street, whispered as Richard's entourage walked away. That night, Daniel sat alone in the living room while Vanessa retreated upstairs without a word. The house felt colder, heavier, suffocating. He stared at the fine notice and muttered to himself, this isn't about rules anymore. This is about control. The HOA wasn't just punishing him for parking in the wrong spot. They were tightening the noose around his family, using fines and humiliation to break him down. And if Vanessa kept standing with them, Daniel wondered if he had already lost the fight before it even began. By Thursday, the fine still sat unpaid on the kitchen counter, glaring at Daniel every time he walked past. Vanessa had moved it to the center of the table, as if to remind him every moment of the day. She treated it like evidence in a trial, his trial. That morning, over breakfast, Vanessa finally broke the silence. When are you going to pay it? Daniel didn't look up from his eggs. I'm not. It's unfair. Her fork clattered onto her plate. Not? Daniel, you can't just ignore them. Do you want them to pile more fines on us? Do you want to ruin our credit? Lose the house. Her words pierced him. Lose the house. The thought sent a chill down his spine, but his pride was louder. They can't take our house over a parking mistake. Vanessa laughed bitterly. You really don't get it, do you? They can. They've done it before, to other people. You think this is about one mistake? It's about showing them you won't obey. The conversation escalated quickly. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. I won't be bullied into paying for something I don't deserve. Vanessa shot back. You're not just stubborn, Daniel, you're reckless. You'd rather drag us both down than admit you were wrong. The fight spiraled, voices echoing through the house. It wasn't long before they were outside again, their words sharp enough to cut the morning air. Vanessa's voice carried across the street. Maybe I should just move in with my mother. At least she doesn't park in other people's spots. Daniel froze. Neighbors across the way, Mrs. Henderson, the Wilsons, even the Jenkins, were standing in their yards, pretending to pull weeds or water flowers but clearly hanging on every word. Curtains shifted as more faces peeked out. And then, as if summoned by the noise, the black HOA SUV rolled into view once more. The two officers climbed out, notepad in hand. This time, they didn't even bother to hide their smirks. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, the tall officer said, "We have received multiple complaints regarding domestic disturbances audible from the street." Daniel's chest tightened. "Are you kidding me? We can't even argue in our own home." The officers scribbled something down. Arguments conducted in public view fall under disruption of neighborhood peace. This will be noted. Vanessa, red-faced and furious, didn't defend him. Instead, she muttered, "Maybe if you actually followed the rules, none of this would happen." That cut deeper than any fine. The HOA wasn't just driving a wedge between him and his neighbors, it was prying open cracks in his marriage. That night, the silence in the house was unbearable. Vanessa locked herself in the bedroom, and Daniel sat in the dark living room, staring at the fine notice. His mind replayed the scene over and over, the smirking officers, the judgmental neighbors, Vanessa's voice shouting about leaving him. It hit him then. The HOA wasn't simply punishing him. They were feeding off the chaos, using fines and warnings to stir conflict, knowing it would isolate him further. They wanted him broken, humiliated, maybe even gone. But as he sat there in the quiet, Daniel clenched his fists. He wasn't going to let them destroy his marriage. He wasn't going to let them destroy him. Yet he also couldn't ignore the truth. Vanessa was slipping further from his side with every passing day. And if he couldn't find a way to turn this around soon, the HOA wouldn't need to take his house. They'd already taken his peace, his pride, and now, maybe even his wife. Saturday morning brought no peace. The neighborhood was buzzing with whispers, and Daniel felt like every pair of eyes followed him when he stepped outside. Even mowing the lawn seemed like an act under surveillance. Neighbors glanced his way and quickly turned their heads, pretending to trim hedges or check mailboxes. Inside, the tension between Daniel and Vanessa reached its boiling point. She had barely spoken to him in 2 days, and when she finally did, her words were like daggers. "I've had enough," she said, folding laundry with sharp, deliberate movements. "Enough of what?" Daniel asked, though his stomach already knew the answer. "Of this circus. The fines, the neighbors, the humiliation. You're too proud to admit you were wrong, and we're paying for it every single day." Daniel set his coffee mug down a little too hard, the ceramic clinking against the table. "I'm not wrong, Vanessa. They're abusing their power. If we give in, they'll just keep pushing." She snapped, throwing a shirt into the basket. "And if we don't give in, they'll keep punishing us. Can't you see? You're fighting a battle you can't win. And it's tearing us apart." The words cut deeper than Daniel wanted to admit. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a loud knock rattled the front door. He already knew who it was. 2 HOA officers stood on the porch, clipboards in hand, black uniforms crisp and intimidating. The taller one spoke without preamble. "Mr. Thompson, this is your final notice. Failure to pay your fine will result in escalated penalties, including potential legal action." Daniel's fists clenched. All this over one parking mistake? The shorter officer smirked. "Rules are rules. If you can't handle them, perhaps this isn't the right neighborhood for you." Vanessa appeared behind him, her arms crossed. "Just pay it, Daniel." "You're siding with them?" "I'm siding with reality," she shouted. "I won't lose my home because you want to play hero." The officers exchanged glances, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Daniel felt like a cornered animal, his wife glaring at him from one side, the HOA officers looming on the other, and the entire neighborhood watching like vultures from behind their curtains. The breaking point came when Vanessa, her face flushed with anger, said the words Daniel had feared for days. "Maybe I should leave. Maybe I can't do this anymore." The officers didn't move, didn't even flinch, but Daniel could see the satisfaction in their eyes. They had turned his marriage into entertainment, another victory for their petty rulebook. Daniel's vision blurred with rage. "Get off my property," he growled at the officers. Not until you sign this notice of escalation, the taller one replied calmly. Something inside Daniel snapped. He grabbed the notice, crumpled it in his fist, and threw it onto the lawn. You want to fight? You've got one. The officers scribbled notes, unfazed. One of them even chuckled. We'll see you in court, Mr. Thompson. When they left, Vanessa stood frozen in the doorway, tears threatening to spill. This isn't just about a parking spot anymore, she whispered. It's about us. And I don't know if we'll survive it. Daniel watched her walk away, his heart pounding. He wanted to run after her, to beg her to stay, but his pride anchored him to the floor. For the first time, he realized the HOA wasn't just enforcing rules, they were dismantling lives, piece by piece. And unless he acted soon, he would lose not just his home, but his marriage too. Sunday morning dawned with an eerie stillness. The sky was bright and cloudless, but Daniel felt a storm brewing inside him. He sat at the dining table, staring at the crumpled HOA notice. Every fine, every warning, every smirk from those officers had led to this moment. His marriage was dangling by a thread, his neighbors treated him like a criminal, and his pride was scarred beyond repair. Vanessa came downstairs, suitcase in hand. The sight hit him like a punch to the chest. You're leaving? His voice cracked. She didn't look at him. I can't do this anymore, Daniel. I warned you. Vanessa, please. No, she cut him off, her voice trembling. I love you, but love isn't enough when you're dragging me into war with an entire community. You're obsessed with fighting them, and I won't be collateral damage. Before Daniel could respond, there was another knock at the door. Sharp, deliberate, final. He opened it to find not 2, but 4 HOA officers standing on the porch, their black uniforms making them look more like an invading army than neighborhood volunteers. Mr. Thompson, the tall officer said coldly, this is your last opportunity to comply. Pay the fine, or we proceed with legal enforcement. Neighbors were already gathering outside. Some stood on their lawns, others peered from behind curtains. It was a spectacle, and the HOA wanted it that way. Vanessa stepped outside, clutching her suitcase. Daniel, don't do this, she whispered, almost pleading. Just pay them. Daniel's heart pounded. He looked at her, then at the officers, then at the crowd of neighbors. His whole life had been reduced to this choice, surrender or resist. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward. You want me to bend? To crawl? To admit guilt for something I didn't do? But I'm not alone anymore. He raised his voice, turning to the neighbors who had been watching in silence for weeks. How many of you have been fined for nonsense? How many warnings have you received for trash cans, for grass length, for parking 1 inch too close to the curb? How many of you are living in fear of them? The crowd stirred. Murmurs rippled through the air. Mrs. Henderson shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Wilson lowered his gaze. For the first time, people weren't just watching, they were listening. The tall officer sneered. This isn't about them. This is about you breaking the rules. Daniel shook his head. No. This is about all of us being bullied into silence. A voice rang out from the crowd. He's right. It was Mrs. Jenkins, the quiet widow from across the street. They fined me $100 for my flower pots. Another neighbor chimed in. They threatened to tow my car because it had a dent. The murmurs grew into shouts, a chorus of pent-up frustration. The officers' smug confidence began to falter. They hadn't expected resistance. Vanessa looked at Daniel, her eyes wide. For the first time in weeks, she saw not just stubbornness in him, but courage. The tall officer raised his clipboard. Enough. If you don't disperse, further action will be taken. But the neighbors didn't budge. One by one, they stepped closer to Daniel, forming a wall of defiance against the officers. Daniel felt a surge of strength. He turned to Vanessa, his voice low but steady. I'm not just fighting for me. I'm fighting for us. For everyone here. Vanessa's grip on her suitcase loosened. She dropped it to the ground. The standoff stretched for long, tense minutes. Finally, the officers exchanged nervous glances, muttered something about reviewing procedures, and retreated to their black SUV. As they drove away, The crowd erupted into cheers. Daniel stood there, exhausted but victorious. He had no idea what would come next. Legal battles, more fines, maybe even worse. But in that moment, he had something stronger than fear: unity. Vanessa slipped her hand into his. "Maybe," she whispered, "you were right after all." For the first time in weeks, Daniel smiled. The war with the HOA wasn't over. But the neighborhood had finally found its voice. And so had he.